All right, let's dive right into this explainer. So, there is this newly announced 60-day memorandum of understanding between the United States and Iran. But today, we're not just skimming the headlines. We're going to look at this strictly through the lens of a veteran foreign policy analyst. Is this a genuine diplomatic breakthrough, or is it a high-stakes chess match? We're going to unpack the actual details, the geopolitical pressures, and the harsh military realities on the ground. We'll evaluate leverage stalling tactics and military posturing, pretty much just like a high-level intelligence briefing. Here is our roadmap for today. First, we'll outline the proposed 60-day deal. Second, the pressures driving the agreement. Third, the veteran analyst perspective. And finally, the critical question of enforcement. Okay, part one, the proposed 60-deal deal. Let's take a quick look at the surface-level terms of this memorandum. Now, right off the bat, keep in mind this is still waiting on final approval from both Washington and Tehran. But if it gets signed, the framework extends the current ceasefire by 60 days. It also lifts the American blockade, which means shipping through the highly contested Strait of Hormuz becomes completely unrestricted. In exchange, the U.S. commits to discussing sanctions relief, unfreezing Iranian funds, and setting up mechanisms for humanitarian aid. But here's the catch, and it's a big one that immediately sets off alarm bells for foreign policy analysts. The final point, the massive, overarching issue of Iran's nuclear program and highly enriched uranium, it's just paused. The absolute core of the conflict is literally just getting kicked down the road. Moving right along to Section 2, the pressures driving the agreement. What are the geopolitical catalysts bringing them to the table? You know, diplomatic deals of this magnitude absolutely do not happen in a vacuum. They're driven by intense, immediate, and usually very asymmetric pressures. On one side, you've got the U.S. and Europe navigating some pretty major political headaches. For the U.S., summer is coming, and skyrocketing gas prices become a huge domestic political issue, especially for a conflict that really doesn't have broad public support. Plus, analysts point out the U.S. is shouldering the massive burden of protecting the Strait of Hormuz, which is a vital European trade route, so there's definitely frustration about European free riding. But then, look at the other side. Iran's motivation? It has nothing to do with poll numbers or gas prices. It is purely existential. They are dealing with an economy in absolute freefall and are desperate for relief. And when you look at the raw data, it's crystal clear why Iran is at the negotiating table. The U.S. naval blockade has just devastated their economy. We're talking about overall exports being down a staggering 90%. Imagine losing 90% of your income. Crude oil extraction is operating at just 50% capacity, half of what it should be. And CENTCOM has fiercely enforced this blockade. They've actually turned around more than 100 vessels, systematically cutting Iran off from the outside world. This is an economy brought to the absolute brink, making a temporary pause a desperate necessity for the regime's pure survival. Let's shift into Section 3, the veteran analyst perspective. Let's compare the surface against the reality. So when you analyze these terms through the deeply skeptical eyes of experts who have tracked Iran for decades, a completely different picture emerges. Take regional expert Trey Yingst, for example. He points out they like to drag out these deals because it puts them in a more advantageous position when they try to get what they want. To a veteran analyst, this is foreign policy 101. There is simple no historical reference point for Iranian leadership negotiating in good faith. Their playbook historically relies way more on stalling than actually compromising. And that brings us to the critical concept of buying time. Analysts warn that we absolutely have to recognize when diplomacy is being weaponized as a stalling tactic. Entering these talks might not be a genuine effort to end a 47-year conflict, right? Instead, it's a highly calculated move to alleviate that crushing economic pressure we just looked at. To an analyst, a pause is a weapon. It allows a regime heavily focused on internal survival to catch its breath, reposition its assets, and basically live to fight another day. And this deep skepticism, it goes all the way up the military chain of command. Listen to former CENTCOM commander Mark Fox. He says, "I see this as a generational opportunity to end a 47-year war. By kicking the can down the road by a 60-day extension, I don't think is the right way to go." Lifting the pressure exactly when it's yielding maximum results is viewed by these experts as a profound strategic mistake. They see a regime deeply committed to its goals, meaning this 60-day pause might just squander a super rare window for decisive resolution. Finally, Section 4, the question of enforcement, because the devil is always in the details. Any intelligence analyst will tell you that a diplomatic agreement is literally only as good as its enforcement, and the reality on the ground is incredibly volatile. Just picture this. Negotiators are getting ready to sit down for a ceasefire, but just hours prior, Iran launches 5 drones in and near the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. CENTCOM forces successfully intercept those drones and strike Iranian territory. But then, at 10:17 p.m., Iran responds with another drone attack directed at a U.S. base in Kuwait. You have missiles and drones flying, egregious ceasefire violations, at the exact same time diplomats are talking. It begs a massive question. How do you enforce a deal with an adversary that plays this fast and loose with military escalation? Because of that track record, the alternative proposed by veteran analysts is radically different. Instead of a 60-day pause, former military commanders are pushing for a strategy called the unblinking eye. Step 1. Maintain a 24/7, 365-day posture of relentless surveillance. Step 2. Back it up with serious military hardware. Keep airborne drones, helicopters, and ordnance constantly deployed. And Step 3. Relentlessly force the freedom of navigation. The goal is to categorically deny Iran any control over the Strait of Hormuz, enforcing immediate consequences the absolute second they try to cause mischief. It relies on unwavering military resolution, not fragile paper treaties. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you to ponder this complex foreign policy dilemma. We've seen the devastating economic data bringing Iran to the table. We've seen the political pressures squeezing the West. But we've also heard the really stark warnings from veteran analysts who've spent their lives studying this conflict. Based on the data, the long history of stalling, and the active drone strikes happening in the background, does this 60-day deal actually solve the core problem? Or does it just buy a desperate regime 60 more days to catch its breath and reload? It's a massive question, and it's one that leaders in Washington and around the globe will have to answer very, very soon.